Time for your daily dose of the Trump, a summary of day one of the hush money trial coming out of New York. Spoiler alert,
it is a load of crap.
Here's a more thorough breakdown. Viva Frei, former Montreal litigator turned current Florida rumbler, in my home office doing another breakdown of a summary of what's going on in the New York hush money election interference trial. Spoiler alert, it is horse crap beyond your wildest dreams. We'll get into it, but this is actually the 5th day of the trial. Although the first 4 were jury selection, we now have the jury in the Trump New York hush money election interference trial. But it's day 1 of the actual trial. It was a short day because it is Passover tonight. Somebody had to leave early for a dentist appointment. Others had to leave early for Passover, so they cut the day early. But it's day 1, and they had their opening arguments, and I think they proceeded to at least one witness. I've been following it with Adam Klasfeld on Twitter, and when you see his reporting of what's going on there, I'm not putting Klasfeld on blast, and I'm not criticizing Klasfeld. I am criticizing what's going on in that courtroom, because this is beyond election interference. The actual election interference is coming from the court, the prosecutor, and that judge. This is now going to criminalize how elections are conducted in the future on a going forward basis. But before we even get into Klasfeld's Twitter thread, tweet, whatever the heck you call it, his Twitter reporting, because they have no cameras in the courtroom, they can only report via tweets, summaries, etc., etc. Rachel Maddow gave an interview. It was the most insightful journalistic analysis you've ever seen in your life. She deserves a Pulitzer Prize for this type of reporting. She described what Trump looked like in that courtroom. Trump being bogged down with a 6-week trial on bogus, trumped-up charges. She had this to say about Donald Trump.
Yes, and I should say, in the courtroom, it's, President Trump's back is to all of us who are sitting as observers. He seemed basically inert. He kind of slumped his shoulders and was I'm a slump-shouldered person. He was kind of slump-shouldered like this when he came in, and while he was sitting there. At times when Mr. Pecker was testifying, I noted that he was kind of leaning heavily on the desk. There were times when he leaned from one side to the other, but I just didn't see him as particularly animated. Again, I may not have been in the best position to observe that closely. I would say that he seems thinner than I have seen him in the past. He seems considerably older, and he seems annoyed, resigned, maybe angry. He seems like a man who's miserable to be here. And again, that's, I'm no body language expert, and this is just my observation, but he seemed old and tired and mad.
He seemed old, mad, and tired. Now, I want to say first things first. Confession through projection, Rachel Maddow. First of all, Donald Trump is old. Second of all, he is mad, and he has damn good reason to be, but there is a tendency that people tend to see in others what they feel to be true of themselves. So old, angry, and tired. Very telling, Rachel Maddow, but also it's very accurate because he is old. He should be angry because
this is a load of crap.
I won't belabor the point, but I'll probably end up saying it every day with your daily dose of the Trump. This is actual lawfare election interference. The entire world is seeing it, and I feel it to be my obligation to put it on as much blast as possible so that no one says,
I didn't know what a joke this trial was.
Among the earliest issues of the day was the corrupt Judge Juan Marchand. If you don't know why I say the corrupt Judge Juan Marchand, it's because his daughter works for a PR firm who has Adam Schiff and Democrat political action committees as clients, have been raking in money hand over fist by publicizing this very trial that her father is the judge of. The daughter gave a podcast in 2019 where she explained how her father relayed to her that he didn't like politicians using Twitter, a direct reference to Trump.
So I've actually had a couple conversations with my dad recently where he's kind of like, I hate that politicians use Twitter, and like it's so unprofessional, and that's not how a politician should behave themselves. And I explained that, I think there are a lot of instances where it is not used in, when our president tweets anything that he thinks, and, that's not what he should be using it for. But the pro is that candidates aren't sort of at the mercy of the traditional media anymore.
So yeah, Judge Juan Marchand, who refused to recuse himself, is corrupt, and I will say it every single time. Now, he adjudicated on some early issues as relates to what Trump can be confronted with if he decides to testify. Adam Klasfeld at Klasfeld Reports tweets, the judge notes he has a, quote, wide range of discretion, end quote, under the law to determine this balance. News, Trump can be confronted by the ruling against him in New York Attorney General's civil fraud case, the judge rules. This is if he testifies. Trump also can be confronted with findings of his gag order violations in his civil fraud case if he testifies, the judge rules. The judge is now ruling that if Donald Trump testifies in his own defense, that he can be confronted with the alleged violations of the gag order coming out of that other equally corrupt persecution, the civil fraud case conducted by New York nipple judge Engoron and the corrupt Leticia James. That if Trump chooses to testify, that he can be confronted with the ruling in that particular case, that absurd $450 million ruling that required a $154 million bond after it was reduced by the Court of Appeal. Parentheses, there was a challenge to that certi. Leticia James raised it last week. I covered it in a vlog last week. Well, that hearing, pursuant to which Leticia James was asking the court to order Donald Trump to put up another certi of $150 some odd million within the next 7 days because they didn't like the certi company, the bonding company, KSIC. Well, they came to some sort of an agreement today that will resolve that issue, and Trump can now focus all of his attentions on this bogus criminal prosecution. From ABC News, Trump avoids challenge to $175 million bond in civil fraud case. New York Attorney General Leticia James had argued that the bond should be rejected. James' office had expressed concern with, quote, awkward language, end quote, in the bond agreement that might allow the defendants or their certi to swap the cash bond with a, quote, less secure, end quote, form of collateral like mutual funds or other assets that can fluctuate in value. Andrew Amer, a prosecutor with the Attorney General's office, described that possibility as a, quote, huge loophole that, quite frankly, you could drive a Mack truck through, end quote. Amer proposed 5 conditions that would satisfy the state's concerns, including a pledge to maintain the bond account with cash and a stipulation to grant the certi, Knight Specialty Insurance Company, exclusive control of that account. After a 20-minute break, Trump attorney Chris Keyes agreed to the state's proposed conditions. Keyes had readied 2 witnesses to provide evidence on Monday, but the parties managed to negotiate their deal before any testimony was delivered. Whoop-de-doo, so now Leticia James's attempt to bankrupt Donald Trump in that bogus civil fraud case, well, that's put on the back burner for now, and we can get back to the criminal trial in New York. So let's get back to the criminal trial. Because in that criminal trial, Judge Marchand is also allowing evidence from other civil trials to be presented against Donald Trump should he choose to testify. News, Trump can also be confronted with 2 federal judges' findings that he defamed E. Jean Carroll if he testifies, the judge rules. Trump can also be confronted with his agreement to dissolve the Trump Foundation if he testifies, the judge rules. In parentheses, notably, the judge appears to have excluded the sexual abuse finding in the E. Jean Carroll case. Now, call me cynical, I appreciate that a defendant, when they choose to testify, can be confronted as to their character, as to prior statements that they made that are inconsistent with, etc., but something in here smells rather fishy, as though it's designed to deter Donald Trump from testifying at all costs by leaving the window wide open as to what they can come back and attempt to contradict him with by opening that window open as much as that window can possibly open. Call me cynical. I think that's what's being done here, but maybe I'm being a little too cynical.
There's a cynical feeling saying I should give up.
Then we get to opening arguments, and I would say be prepared to laugh because the only other option would be to cry. It's that absurd. Colangelo describes the conspiracy with AMI as having 3 parts. 1, to run positive coverage. 2, to attack opponents. 3, be, quote, eyes and ears, end quote, of the campaign. He says that last prong of the conspiracy falls under the rubric of, quote, catch and kill, end quote. Understand the absolute absurdity of this. The prosecutor in their opening arguments is alleging that the conspiracy that Donald Trump engaged in was to run positive stories about Donald Trump in an election cycle, to attack his opponents in an election cycle, and to have someone be the eyes and ears of the campaign, which could consist of catching and killing negative stories about Trump in an election cycle. Call me cynical, call me naive, call me whatever name you want. It seems to me what the prosecutor is alleging is a conspiracy is political campaigning by definition. The prosecutor describes 3, quote, catch and kill, end quote, operations. The first payoff went to Dino Sajudin, who had been hawking a false story that Trump fathered a child out of wedlock. Pecker was acting in that scheme, had been acting as a, quote, co-conspirator, end quote, Colangelo says. They give it such a scary name, the catch and kill operation, and they're talking about a catch and kill operation that revolves around a false story that Trump fathered a kid out of wedlock. When AMI determined later that Mr. Sajudin's allegations weren't even true, Cohen instructed Pecker to delay releasing him from the non-disclosure agreement until after the 2016 election, the prosecutor tells the jury. David Pecker is reportedly set to be the first witness, and the prosecutor promises the jury that they will hear him testify. Colangelo says Cohen taped a phone call about silencing McDougal's account. Quote, you will get a chance to hear that recording during this trial, end quote. Colangelo, quote, you'll hear the defendant's own voice on tape working out the intended agreement, end quote. It's not just that the prosecutor is trying to criminalize what is basically political campaigning in its purest form. They are basically also victimizing what would appear to be a victim of some form of extortion, because if somebody's going to come out and make up a story and lie about you and you decide to just shut them up for whatever it takes to shut them up, and now they're going to criminalize you for having paid someone to not lie about you during an election cycle, this is wild. But they're also seemingly trying to criminalize hiding information that might be prejudicial in a campaign. I mean, this is now trying to criminalize paying people off to not talk or not disclose potentially prejudicial stories, even if they happen to be true. What is going to be next? Are they going to impose a positive obligation to disclose prejudicial stories about yourself, that if you don't disclose that which you know might have a negative impact on your campaign, that's somehow election interference? We are not far from that reality, people. Understand that. Oh yeah, and because it's clearly relevant to this trial, the prosecutor in opening statements has to reference the grab her by the video. But don't worry, the totally not corrupt Judge Juan Marchand, whose daughter is totally not raking in millions of dollars hands over fist based on this very prosecution, he's not going to allow the video in as evidence because that would be unfair. All that he's going to allow as evidence is the transcript of the grab her by the video. Colangelo pivots to Trump's quote hot mic end quote moment in the quote Access Hollywood end quote tape. Hope Hicks was sent a transcript of the tape, he says. The prosecutor on Daniel's hush money payoff, quote, Trump didn't want to write a check himself, to write a $130,000 check himself, end quote. So they figured out that Cohen would make the payment, quote, through a shell company to make it harder to track, end quote, Colangelo says. Criminalizing a settlement among two adults because they allege that that settlement was intended to interfere with an election, this entire case is a load of crap. Then Trump's attorney gets up and gives their opening statement and says what you'd think they would say. Their client is innocent. This is all nonsense. We don't know how it was delivered or how it was received because we don't have video of this. All we can do is rely on Klasfeld's interpretation via his tweets. Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, gives his first lines. Quote, President Trump is innocent. President Trump did not commit any crimes. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office should never have brought this case, end quote. Blanche notes that Trump is presumed to be innocent and emphasizes what the legal concept means until a jury holds otherwise. Blanche, quote, the story you just heard, you will learn is not true, end quote. By the end of the trial, Blanche argues there will be plenty of reasonable doubt. And then finally, Blanche offers a competing interpretation of the $420,000 to Cohen. Quote, ask yourself, would a frugal businessman, a man who, quote, pinches pennies, end quote, pay back a $130,000 debt to the tune of $420,000, end quote. He insists that it wasn't a, quote, payback, end quote. The underlying argument here is that Cohen did what he did and didn't necessarily tell Trump, and he might have done it for his own reasons. We might find this out during the trial. And all that Trump thought he was doing was paying his monthly retainer to his attorney and wasn't aware that his fixer, Michael Cohen, had agreed to pay Stormy Daniels $130,000 for her to be quiet, whether or not it was Trump paying her off for her silence, or whether or not it was Stormy Daniels extorting Donald Trump. Trump allegedly didn't know about it, and the checks to Cohen were in fact a monthly retainer for the legal services Michael Cohen was rendering for Donald Trump. Legal services, my goodness. Sometimes you get what you pay for, and other times you get a whole hell of a lot more than what you paid for. So that is the recap opening arguments. They cut the day short early because of Passover, and apparently the court is going to put up the transcripts from the day before, the day after, an exceptional move prepared by Lord knows whom, and the accuracy of which, who knows. You know what would be more transparent than that? Having videos in the courtroom, live stream this trial for the rest of the world to see, but they don't want to do that. They want to control the information, they want to control the spin, they want to control the narrative, and that is exactly what they're doing right now. From Frank G. Runyon, New York courts will release daily transcripts of Donald Trump's criminal trial. And because that tweet included a screen grab and not an actual hyperlink, I transcribed the hyperlink and I'm going to put it in the pinned comment so that you can all access the transcripts as soon as they are ready. But that is the update. If you like what I do, you know what to do. Like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a comment in the comment section below. Viva Frei on Rumble, the Viva Frei on Twitter, vivabarneslaw.locals.com for the best above average community anywhere.
Am I getting in trouble?
But more important than anything, get out there, exercise, eat healthy, sunlight, talk to people in real life, and now you know you vlog. Peace out, peeps. Booyah!
He seems like a man who's miserable to be here. And that, again, that's, you know, I'm no body language expert, and this is just my observation, but he seemed old and tired and mad.
Well, when he came out.
I probably would seem that way too if I was looking at this kind of a proceeding.